The world will never have a currency that is not backed up by a central banks and treasuries. As long as the central banks exist, it will never happen. There is no nation that will give control of its currency to a system that cannot be directly controlled.
The world governments are not going to allow this to have traction at any level because, and again, I always go back to this quote by the Rothschild family way back in the day that give me control of the nation's money supply and I don't need to write the laws. And there's no way that they're going to allow us after all these years of clamping down on Switzerland. They say, okay, yeah, let's have an anonymous global currency, just give up control of the money supply. It's outrageous to think that they will allow this.
One thing that we can be sure of is that nothing is too big to fail, and there are many reasons that suggest that this financial experiment will not replace national currencies. Bitcoin's early lure was the democratization of currency. Since a central bank doesn't control the blockchain, cryptocurrencies levels the economic playing field. But as the ongoing inflationary crisis proves, the influence of a central regulatory authority isn't always a bad thing. To fight rising prices, the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to counter the dollar's declining purchasing power. As borrowing became more expensive, the Fed's actions choked off the flow of money into the economy, and the inflation rate is now cooling. Bitcoin has no such central authority that can offer a similar remedy. Cryptocurrencies that worth $68,000 in November 2021 are worth about $24,000 now. When a currency loses nearly 2/3 of its value in less than 2 years, reasonable economists would consider it a crisis. With no central authority to address that crisis, Bitcoin owners can only wait and hope for the best.
Although some people think it's maybe a complement of gold, but it doesn't have any actual value. And that's where I get into a lot of arguments with these crypto guys, because they say, well, gold doesn't have any actual value either, which is laughable, because of course gold has actual value. There are lots of things that I can do with gold, and that shows that it has value. There's nothing that I can do with Bitcoin other than give it to somebody else. I mean, that's the whole purpose of it, is to give it to somebody else. And
stocks have value because they represent ownership in a company. Commodities have value because they are the raw materials that are used in the production of goods. Bitcoin investors seem to be relying on the greater fool theory. All you need to profit from an investment is to find someone willing to buy the asset at an even higher price. In short, Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. It's valuable because people have decided to assign value to it. Bitcoin proponents argue that the same thing could be said about money. Money, after all, is a construct just like Bitcoin. Since the dollar was removed from the gold standard, they argue that the only real value of fiat currency is that society agrees that it is, indeed, valuable. This is incorrect. Money has the value of the guarantee of the government that issues it. In fact, on the Indian rupee note, you will see a promise to pay the bearer issued by the RBI governor. In the US dollar, you will see the words legal tender, which means the same thing. Governments have the power to tax their people and businesses, the ability to sell public assets, issue bonds, and other ways to guarantee their currencies. The US dollar is backed by the full faith and credit of the US government, which can guarantee its currency by selling public assets, issuing bonds, and demanding that individuals and businesses pay taxes in the same currency that it issues. These are formidable powers that give the confidence that the value of the currency will be there. But the power of Bitcoin is questionable.
Governments are going to crush it one day for 3 reasons, okay? One is when it's used for terrorist activities. Number 2, when a lot of little old ladies lose their money. And number 3 is the most important, whenever a government forms itself, and you go to any country in the world, pull out the currency, look at the date, that fiat currency was formed by that government with the central bank, because governments like to control their currency. Like to know who has it, where it's going, why it's going, when it went, etc.
Money is heavily defended by the government issuing it. Central banks go into the international monetary markets to perform market operations, which is to buy or sell their national currencies in order to keep them stable. Without stability, a currency does not work. On the other hand, Bitcoin's volatility makes it a terrible currency. It doesn't matter how many vendors profess to accept it. Just think of it this way. If you have Bitcoin, will you use it to purchase anything? You won't. You would just use fiat money. That is because you didn't buy Bitcoin to use as a currency. You bought it as a speculative investment, hoping that it would go up in value. You wouldn't pay in Bitcoin because your fear is that 2 weeks later, Bitcoin's value goes up by 20%. For the same reason, when Bitcoin starts to slide, vendors will stop accepting it as payment. because they don't want the value to go down by 20% a week later. Another thing that makes Bitcoin to be a bad currency is that if prices of goods and services are priced using BTC, a cafe with prices set in Bitcoin will have to change prices every hour because of how wildly the value of Bitcoin fluctuates. Many banks will not allow their financial resources to be used to buy cryptocurrency due to its volatility, and banks have no plans to abandon fiat currency, even if they are borrowing elements of blockchain technology to improve banking security and privacy. The most valuable thing about Bitcoin is that it introduced blockchain technology to the world. Blockchain technology drastically improves the speed, privacy, and security of sending money. Even though Bitcoin was the first to introduce blockchain to the world, it's not necessary for blockchain to exist. Sort of like if one web page goes down, the internet still exists.
It's not going to succeed as money. It's not going to work. It's just a highly speculative asset.
Currency such as the United States dollars or euros is recognized as legal tender and is supported by national and supranational governments. They are supported by the entire economic systems that these authorities control, and the authorities that issue the currency guarantee their purchasing power. Bitcoin, on the other hand, is not supported by a single entity. It only has worth because people value it, and its price is closely related to public opinion. When public interest in Bitcoin declines, so will its price, causing the virtual money to become worthless. All that money needs to accomplish is to act as a constant measure of worth for all products on the market. This is something that currencies like the US dollar are very excellent at, as they also serve as legal tender when backed by central banks and treasuries. Bitcoin can never be the measure of worth for products and service because of its volatility, and the fundamental reason why Bitcoin's value has increased so dramatically in the past several years is because its owners prefer to hold rather than spend it. As a result, Bitcoin is entirely unable to compete with well-established currencies, and unfortunately, Bitcoin will never be able to become a currency unless it becomes stable. And even if its adoption was needed, Bitcoin's path to mainstream usage faces many legal, regulatory, and cultural hurdles. Bitcoin, which is intended to be totally private and independent of governments, cannot be the future of money since it doesn't fulfill any of the traditional functions of currency. These decentralized electronic tokens haven't really worked well as money this far. Their price has been extremely volatile. Using them as a means of account would mean changing the price of goods and services daily according to the views of speculators. It also makes them an inadequate store of value, while their price has often rocketed upwards, helping some of the first to mine them or bet on their value to become millionaires. There is no guarantee that governments will allow this to take over, because government is trying so hard every day to fight money laundering, drug trafficking, child pornography, and Bitcoin has so far primarily been of interest to criminals as well as speculators and the kind of low-level fraudsters and chancers that go along with every new financial technology. Financial transactions need to be accompanied by more traditional messages using a service that the government can monitor or ban. Being able to transfer money secretly is useless if you cannot contact your financial backers securely.
I've always been deeply opposed to crypto, Bitcoin, etc. You pointed out the only true use case for it is criminals, drug traffickers, anti-money laundering, tax avoidance, and that is a use case because it is somewhat anonymous, not fully, and because you can move money instantaneously, and because it doesn't go through, as you mentioned, all these systems have been built up over many years, know your customers, sanctions, OFAC, they can get bypass all of that. If I was the government, I'd close it down.
The fact that Bitcoin is too volatile to function as a trustworthy money is another argument against it. Bitcoin prices fluctuate frequently, making it impossible to forecast whether they will remain at their current value tomorrow. Even if you pay 10,000 BTC for your pizza today, if the price of Bitcoin triples the next week, the entire transaction may leave you feeling unsatisfied. Vendors that accept Bitcoin risk having all of their wealth and profits completely eroded if prices fall. Bitcoin opponents laugh at the notion that it may take the place of national currencies as a means of international payment. The decisions made by these institutions and their monetary policies affect the stability and health of national and supranational economies. There is no elected government or other dominant group in charge of Bitcoin. When the economy is in trouble, you cannot create additional bitcoins, and you also cannot boost its value through other measures that are required for a healthy economy. No nation would give control of its currency to a system that cannot be directly controlled. Can we really imagine the central banks of China, the US, and the EU saying, let's cancel our currencies and just use Bitcoin, which no one can control? This would be fatal to their monetary systems. As we have seen in September 2017, China has banned Bitcoin trading and mining. Various other countries have also hinted that they would be following suit. So no, countries will not adopt Bitcoin. They will issue their own versions instead and then ban Bitcoin.